everyone, I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much for joining me. My mother lives in California and was talking to her about this Real ID compliance license. You know you have it if your driver's license or ID has the star on the upper right hand corner. Here in South Dakota, they began issuing Real ID compliance license back on December 31st of 2009. I remember, I don't know the date, I know it was a long time ago, but to get the new driver's license, I had to submit a lot of documents, and luckily I had them. It was just a pain in the butt to find out where they were at in my home and gather them all together. Being married and divorced, I had to issue or give to them both the marriage certificate. It was a court marriage certificate. They won't honor one from, say, the pasture or wherever you got married at. It has to be an official government marriage license. And then I also had to give them the divorce decree. Had to give my birth certificate. I believe the marriage certificate showed where my name was changed. I had to give proof of residency, 2 pieces of bill. You can use your power bill, maybe a lease agreement, etc. And it might get more complicated for people who have changed their identity, for transgender people. Despite all the rhetoric that's going online, this was not an executive order by Trump or anybody else. It was first looked into and developed back because of 9/11 by President Bush. At least 95% of the people here in South Dakota are now Real ID compliant. I didn't even know I was until I took out my driver's license to see if it had the star on it. Then thinking back to all the identification that was required to get my driver's license when I moved here, at least to my town. It wasn't required when I first moved to South Dakota, probably over 20 years ago, but when I moved to my current town and got my new driver's license showing my new address and all that, that's when I had to submit the marriage certificate, the divorce certificate, birth certificate. It has to be a real birth certificate from the government. All documents have to be state issued, other than the proof of where you actually live, being 2 different bills or maybe a renter's agreement, things like that. The Real ID Act was signed into law by Congress in 2005 by George Bush to establish a minimum security standard for state-issued driver's license and identification cards. These changes were inspired by recommendations from the 9/11 Commission, aiming to improve national security. After many changes and many delays, they have now set the date of May 7th, 2025 to have this ID if you plan on traveling by flights domestically here in the United States or go to a federal building. You will not be able to fly any type of air travel within the United States after May 7th if you don't have the Real ID. Some states do have acceptable other forms of identification, such as passports or military ID. Once again, the legal documents to get the ID card will be proof of your full legal name, think birth certificate, marriage certificate, or court-ordered name change document, proof of citizenship or lawful immigration status, social security card, a W-2 or a pay stub containing your social security number, 2 proofs of residency like utility bill or lease agreement. The cost for Real ID varies by state, but it is generally around $50. Some states combine the Real ID fee with your driver's license renewal cost. Apply sooner than later, with the May 7th, 2025 Real ID deadline looming. DMV appointments will be hotter than Beyonce tickets. If you didn't find the time to get the real ID, well, don't panic. There are acceptable alternatives to real ID for domestic air travel. A U.S. passport or passport card, state-issued enhanced driver's license, EDL, or a Department of Defense or military ID. It is essential to understand how real ID works and what it actually represents. Contrary to misconceptions, it is not a federal ID subject to Trump's executive order recognizing only two sexes, male and female. Real ID refers to state-issued driver's license and identification cards that comply with security standards established by the Real ID Act. This creates a patchwork of policies across the U.S. regarding how individuals can update even the gender marked on their driver's license. Currently, 22 states and Washington, D.C. allow residents to select male, female, or X as their gender marker. Meanwhile, 4 states, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, and Kansas, outright prohibit any changes to the gender marker. The remaining states have vague guidelines or require additional documents, such as proof of surgery, a court order, or amended birth certificate to make the change. To avoid issues at the DMV, it is essential to ensure your documentation aligns with your state's requirements. While much of the spotlight in Washington has been on budget fights and new tariffs, the House passed a bill that could reshape how Americans register to vote. The Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, SAFE Act, and the Real ID would require voters to show proof of U.S. citizenship, such as a passport or birth certificate, in person when registering to vote or updating their voter registration. It passed in Congress and now moves to the Senate, where Democrats have promised to block it. Most Americans approve the requirement of voters to provide identification and proof of citizenship. Polls show, according to a Gallup poll in October, 84% of Americans support photo ID and 83% support providing proof of citizenship when registering to vote for the first time. Now there in California, DeMaio, a Republican, tried to pass a bill that would require Californians voting by mail to provide the last 4 digits of a government-issued identification number, like a social security number or driver's license. If the numbers don't match, the ballot would automatically be disqualified. But that didn't pass, and they're still pushing to get DeMaio's bill into law. The Real ID Act prohibits federal agencies from accepting driver's license and identification cards issued by U.S. states and territories that do not satisfy certain standards for accessing federal government facilities, nuclear power plants, and for boarding airline flights in the United States. I believe you have to apply in person. Once again, the following documents: person, full name, date of birth, and resident address, a social security number or documentation that the person is not eligible for one, and documentations that the person is a U.S. national or a foreign national legally present in the United States. The state or territory must capture a photograph of the applicant, store digital images of the documents presented by the applicant, and verify the documents directly with the authorities that issued them. For example, the Social Security number must be verified with the Social Security Administration, and the legal presence of foreign nationals must be verified with the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, through the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements, SAFE. The state or territory must confirm that any existing identification document of the applicant issued by another state or territory is terminated, limit the validity of identification documents to 8 years, implement background checks and fraud prevention program for employees issuing identification documents, maintain an electronic database of identification documents issued, including driver history and violations, and provide access to all other states and territories. The identification document must display the person's full name, date of birth, gender, photograph, address, signature, document number, security features, and machine-readable technology. States and territories are still allowed to issue identification documents that do not satisfy the Real ID requirements, but in this case, the document must state that it may not be accepted for federal purposes. A survey done in 2023 found that more than 9% of potential voters do not have direct access to these documents. I did find an example for Oregon. The convenience of mail-in voting has allowed Oregon residents to prove citizenship without stepping foot into their local county clerk's office. The SAVE Act could change that. Even if Oregonians do have the documentation, they will be forced to drive all the way to their local county clerk's office to provide this documentation, the Secretary of State said. For folks in rural Oregon, that could mean driving 2, maybe more hours each way. Officials there in Oregon also said that legislation could not have prevented recent errors at the Oregon DMV that allowed several non-citizens to vote with registrations that were not appropriately backed up with documents of citizenship. That error caused by DMV employees incorrectly entering information about documents proving citizenship, the office said. Other hardships, they said that married women who have chosen to take their spouse's last name could have a harder time proving their citizenship due to the specific documents listed out as acceptable by the SAVE Act, according to the Oregon SOS. It forces states to make people whose legal name doesn't match their birth certificate provide additional documents. There are a lot of questions about what those documents will be, and a lot of married women might not have them, the office said. There are 69 million married women in the United States with birth certificates that do not match their last name, according to the Pew Research Center in Oregon. Roughly 5% of men have changed their last names in marriage, totaling to about 4 million nationally. The SAVE Act does not prohibit states from counting ballots after Election Day, despite recent speculations, but voters may feel discouraged from submitting their mail-in ballots in Washington and Oregon due to this misconception, out of fear that their vote may arrive too late to be counted. Rather, there is a bill backed by President Donald Trump, who recently issued an executive order similar to the SAVE Act, requiring all ballots in federal elections to be counted by Election Day. Now, Congress approved legislation, not Trump, requiring documentary proof of U.S. citizens for anyone registering to vote, something voting rights groups have warned could disenfranchise millions of Americans. The bill, known as the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or SAFE Act, now heads to the Senate, where its fate is uncertain because Republicans don't have a large enough majority to avoid a filibuster. So there's 2 different laws. The Real ID Act goes into effect on May 7th, and we're still waiting to see if the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or SAVE Act, will pass. I don't know when they're going to vote on that, but it has passed Congress, and they're just waiting on the Senate. So that's all I have for you right now. Yeah, my mother was quite concerned about voting. I guess they have an election next year. If you have any thoughts or added comments, please put it down below. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll talk to you later. God bless you. Bye.